Hello, this is Luke Turner, and I'm back with, I believe this is episode 8 of building a web app from scratch. Today, there's kind of two main things that I want to focus on. We'll see how far we get. Let's look at the notes again here. What do we need to ship? Basically, these are the two things that I want to build. Starting with the settings page, and then if we have time, we'll dig into doing some UI improvements. Okay, so when we talk about a settings page, there's a couple things that we need to think about. Actually, building the page itself is fairly simple, but one of the more complicated aspects of the settings is to do with units. So currently, well, let's get my stuff running here so we can illustrate. Start the database. Start the client watcher, start the server, and then open the app. Let's just click on one of these, I guess. Okie doke. So kind of the issue here, if I try to add an exercise, these reps, reps is just a number that doesn't have a unit. Weight and assisted weight, these are just numbers, but there's an implied unit involved. Are these pounds or kilograms? Distance also has a unit. Are these kilometers or miles or something else? Feet. And duration also has a unit. And this unit doesn't change between metric and imperial, but we need something to actually qualify the number. Like, is this a number in seconds? Is this a number in minutes, hours, whatever? So let's think about now what happens if the user is using the app with the default setting of pounds, say, and they switch their settings, or in their settings page, they switch their units to metric, and all of a sudden now they're kilograms. What we don't really want is for this exercise, like say I log this right now, that's logged with 123 pounds. It's a heavy dumbbell curl. If I switch my units to kilograms, now all of a sudden this would be rendered in the UI as 123 kilograms, which is obviously a totally different actual weight. So we need to think about when the user switches their unit system, what happens to the values that are stored? How are those values interpreted in the UI and rendered to the user? And basically there's two elements of this, right? There's the unit of the value that's stored in the database, and then there's also the unit of the value that's rendered in the UI. And those don't necessarily have to be the same thing. So in this case, say the weight is 123 pounds. If the user switches their settings to metric, then in the UI, it could automatically do the conversion from 123 to whatever that would be in kilograms, 45 kilograms or something, I don't know. And the number in the database stays the same, but the number in the UI changes. And if we think about it that way, there's kind of like a canonical unit that is always used in the database, irrespective of what the user settings are. Another option we could do is we could have, when the user changes their settings from metric to imperial, it actually updates all of the numbers in the database. And that, would work fine, I guess. Kind of the problem with that is you have to do this big update query to update all those numbers, which maybe is a little bit wasteful. And there's like a risk of things getting a little bit out of sync or something like that. We're not really using transactions here, and I'm not too worried about the fact that these updates aren't atomic, but you could imagine like if the user updates their unit system from metric to imperial, but for some reason the weights of all the exercises don't update due to an error or something like that. Now those two values are out of sync. And there's no real way to get them back into sync from the user's perspective. Again, not that big of a deal, but ultimately it feels like a bit of an awkward solution. Another solution, and probably what I want to go with, is to actually have these weights or just generally these values in the database be not just plain strings, but actually to include some metadata about the unit that they are. And then whatever that unit might be, the conversion to the user's requested unit can happen on the front end. So let me kind of illustrate what I'm talking about here. If we look at our database schema, for sets, we have, for each set, there's an object of parameters, which is like weight, assisted weight, etc. And then there's either a string or a number that's the value for that parameter. But what we might actually want to do is have something like this. Say we define a weight interface where the value is a number and the unit is either pounds or kilograms. And maybe we could abbreviate this as kg. And I could abbreviate pounds too, but not going to for now, just because I feel like the abbreviation for pounds is weird. Okay, so we have weight, and now this would be something like string, which is used for intensity. And really, let's actually make an explicit type for that as well, which is low, medium, or high. And so this could be weight, or it could be intensity, or it could be, what are the two other units we have here? We have duration, and we have distance, and I think that's it. So distance is also something like this. There's a value, and then there's a unit, which would be miles. And maybe I'll make this singular for consistency, mile or kilometer. And then we also have duration. And duration is kind of an interesting one because, you know, it could be something a little bit more like we've got like seconds, number, minutes, number, hours, number, like that. Not sure if this is exactly how we want to do it, but something to explain in the actual structure of the object what these values are. So if we do this, then the advantage is that when the user changes their desired unit system, we don't actually have to update anything in the database because each value in the database includes metadata about what unit system it was created with. And if it was created, say, with miles and they changed their unit system to metric, then on the front end, we can convert that into a kilometer unit, a kilometer number. But if they put it in as kilometers, then we don't have to change it at all. And I kind of like that too, because one of my concerns with doing conversion between these values on the fly is sometimes you're going to get like a weird decimal where it's like the user puts in like 20 kilograms and that's actually, you know, I don't know, 44.444 pounds or whatever. And really, maybe it should just be 45 pounds. I don't know. But This way, it's like we can do the conversion when we need to, but when the user creates new exercises, they don't have to be converted because they'll be created with the right unit system to begin with. Not entirely sure, but I feel like it's worth a shot. Okay, kind of the other thing here too is like I was thinking about this a little bit earlier, and I mean, there is a possibility that somebody might want to override the units for a particular exercise. I don't know if maybe you have one exercise that you want to be in pounds and another exercise you want the weight to be in kilograms. Not sure exactly what the use case for that would be, but this data model will allow us to support that functionality, at least at the database layer, and then we can build that into the UI later if we want to. But also I just kind of like having this explicit metadata associated with things. So, okay, enough talking. Let's actually try and get this working. So there's a couple pages we're going to have to update to get started here before we even create our settings page at all to support this new type of value object. One of them is like when we're creating or updating a set, you can see we have these errors here. And this is because the parameters object isn't creating values with the right format. And then it's going to be the same thing down here where we are updating a set. And then we'll probably have some updates to do in the actual template for the page as well. But let's start with this. And let's kind of just make an assumption about a default unit for these for now. And I'm going to go with imperial because I live in the US. So first of all, we need to set each parameter in the database to something other than just this raw string. So we could say something like if parameter dot data type is, and maybe we could even do like a switch case statement here just for fun. Switch parameter case intensity or no, switch parameter dot data type. So if it's intensity, then we're actually just going to assign the value directly. And the thinking here is, the intensity is just a string. It doesn't have a unit. If it's reps, we're going to do the same thing. If it's number, sorry, that's the data type for reps. Let's get rid of this. If it's distance, we're going to do something. If it's duration, we're going to do something. And if it's weight, we're going to do something. And so like for each of these, we're going to assign, say like for distance, parameters, .parameter ID is going to be equal to, let's just say that for now, the distance value in the UI is miles. So we're going to do value this, and maybe I'll just actually take this as a variable here. So we're going to have the value, and then we're going to have the unit is mile. And let's see what's going on here. So this, I'm actually going to make a new type to refer to this thing. Parameter value is any of those. So we can reuse that here. And then we can also use that here when we're declaring the type of parameter. Okay. So here we're saying the distance is this. For the duration, we're going to do something a little similar, except there is no value in units for this. There's like seconds, minutes, etc. And I'm just going to start with minutes and kind of just assume that whatever the user is putting in here is the value in minutes. Then there's weight. And the weight, we're going to have the unit be pounds or just pound. Okay, and this is complaining because these need to be optional, I guess. Okay. And really we could do, so this is just value. And we could kind of encapsulate both of those in like a default case, actually, instead of having special cases for intensity and number. So it's like, if it's distance, it's set to this. If it's duration, it's set to this. If it's weight, it's set to this. Otherwise, it's just set to the raw value itself. Okay. And the same kind of logic we're going to need down here. And it's starting to feel like something where maybe we should encapsulate this in some kind of function. But part of the reason I don't want to right now is because a lot of this is actually just placeholder logic. That's going to change once we have the units passed in from the front end. And we'll see at that point how much we want to actually abstract it or not. And what's it complaining about? Parameters, parameter.id. Oh, so right, this here also has to be parameter value. Yeah, it definitely does feel like there's some kind of duplication here to work out. But that's okay. Okay, so let's update the view now as well. We'll need to do. So kind of the idea here now is for each of these things, like let's take a look at the like this read-only bit here. This is saying the parameter name is the parameter value, which was previously just a simple value. But now the parameter value actually has potentially multiple properties depending on the data type of the parameter itself. So for now, I'm actually just going to simplify my thinking here by stringifying this object so we can see what the value is without actually having to write a bunch of cases. And we can just leave it at that. And then for all of these like updater functions, we're going to have to update them to use the value of the property instead of just the raw value. I guess if that makes sense. We need to access the value property on the parameter value. So like, for example, let's see. So here we've got like if parameter.datatype equals intensity. This one doesn't need to change. But otherwise, we're going to need to have this be dot value instead, just as a simple example. And we're also going to need another if for handling durations, because with the durations, there's a different format. And I wonder if Pug has like else if. I don't know. Else if parameter.datatype is distance. Then we're going to do something like this dot minutes. And then we're going to, let's actually just make sure that Pug actually has that else if thing. Pug, conditionals, yeah, else if, okay. And then we can kind of copy this down here as well. And this doesn't have the existing value, so we don't actually need that. So actually, this doesn't even need that change at all for now, I guess. Okay, so I think something like that is going to do it. Let's see. So if we go to today, let's delete this old exercise. So one of the things here too is like we've got old exercises now in the database in an old format. If I had live users on this app, I would be needing to update all of those rows in the database, for example, with a migration to switch them to using the new formatted data. Or, it doesn't have to be a migration. You could have a piece of code where it's like, if the value is a string, then update it kind of on demand to the new format. Only when it is read or edited do you bother to update it. But because we don't really have any users other than me yet, don't have to worry about that. But just calling that out is like, if you're working on an app that's live deployed in production, you can't just change your data model like this without actually updating the existing values or handling it in some other way. So let's see what happens here. So let's do just something for everything and see what values we get. So reps is still just a number. Weight has unit pounds. Assisted weight has unit pounds. Distance has unit mile. And duration has unit minutes, so to speak. Looking pretty good. If I edit it, these are not getting filled in, which is interesting. Reps, distance, and duration. Probably forgot to update that. But if we submit it, they are getting updated in the submitted version. So something about this is not pulling in those right values, it seems like. So let's go edit this again. So distance is minutes. Seems like that should work. And then we have reps and duration. Or no, this should actually be duration. So that's one thing. And then we need another special case, I guess, for reps. And maybe I'll just have that be the default case, actually. And we'll put in a case here for anything where it actually has a unit. So if data type is weight or assisted, I believe is what it's called. Yeah, assisted or distance. Then we pull in the value. Okay, so now if I refresh this and I actually put something in here, submit, and edit, they're all populated. And if I update them all, they all get updated. Okay. So with this, we're kind of laying the groundwork for supporting units. And it's making our code more complicated, which is pushing us towards wanting to abstract some of this logic away. But we're going to hold off on that a little longer still. But one thing I do want to do is we can actually add some text here where it includes like the unit in the UI for users to see. So like here, I mean, For instance, if I do that, it's like minutes. So I know now when I'm putting the number in here that I'm doing it in the unit of minutes. And then for this, it would be like span is parameter dot unit. And now if I refresh this, we get our units in there. Reps doesn't need a unit, intensity doesn't need a unit. Let's do the same thing down here. I think I'm going to need to actually get this conditional down here now. Let's leave that for a moment for reference. Put all this in. And so here it would be like duration. We don't need the value. Weight assisted distance. Again, we don't need the value. And this one, again, we just don't need the value. And then we can get rid of this lower else. So now if we try to add an exercise, or refresh the page, I guess. Oh, this should be not set.parameters, but just parameter. Or no, actually this one, see, this is interesting because we don't really know what to put in here yet. This would be something like a default unit. What would be the best way to do this? So here's what I'm thinking. We could do like parameter.default unit. And that's fine. But the whole point of this is for users to be able to configure this stuff. Let's actually do this though for now, and then we can add the configuration. Just take it step by step. So with this, each of these parameters in our exercises is going to need to have a default unit defined as well. Well, I said each, but really only the ones that actually need a unit. So there's weight, assisted weight, and distance. And really, let's put this in a function. Default unit for data type. And that would be parameter definition.data type. And this is going to return a string for now. All right. You want to fix that for me? Thank you. Okie doke. So we could say like if thinking about using a switch case here, but let's just do an if data type equals weight, return pound. If data type equals distance, return mile. And kind of part of the reason I want to do this in a function is because we'll be able to add the user as a parameter to this function and dynamically change the default unit data type at that point. And then this can be like return string or undefined for now. Ultimately, it would be nice if this could be typed better, but not too worried about it. And then we don't need those definitions in the parameters themselves because we can pull them in from the UI, like default unit parameter. And I wonder how, so like if I do this, I'm probably going to get an error that the default unit function is not available. I wonder how to fix that. Let's start using it here as well, like default unit. And this would be parameter dot data type. And this would also be default unit parameter dot data type. And yeah, so now we're getting this kind of annoying error. For now, I know these are going to be correct, so I'm just putting an as any to avoid thinking about them at the moment. Ultimately, the problem is that the type of this return function, or the return type of this function, is not specific enough for the actual type that the parameter object, or I mean the parameter value object, is expecting. So currently we have like this return function here. We could do like a guard clause function or whatever they're called, instead of using an any. But for now, I'm just going to go with what we've got so I can keep moving. And if we do the same thing down here, unit, unit. Okay. So now if I actually look at the today page, because I've imported that function into my module, okay, it's still not actually in here. So do I need to, let's see. Like what I can do is pass in default unit like this, I think, and then that will work. Right. So now if I like select dumbbell curl, we've got our distance minutes, the weight assisted and, or duration minutes. Weight assisted and distance is not returning what I would, oh, this should be parameter.data type. Okay. Okie doke. So now we've got, these types kind of included here explicitly. And if I create a new one of these, it has the right units in there as well. Okie doke. So now we're going to want to make this dynamic based on some property on the user object itself. So let's take a look at the schema here. And really there's two options we could do here. We could have like a unit system, which could be just metric or imperial. Or we could have like individual unit level overrides for each data type parameter. Like maybe somebody wants to do kilograms, but also miles for some reason, like mixing the two unit systems. And for now, I think I'm just going to do that. I'm going to have it be per data type instead of having like a single field for the unit system. And we got to think about what we want to call this column. I do want to make it, I think, just one JSON column, not an individual column per unit type. And maybe I'll call it something like preferred units. And this is going to be a JSONB. And the type of this is going to be a record of data type. So like parameter, definition, data type. to unit, which for now we're just going to call a string. Okay, so we're adding this column. I'm trying to think if there's any other database changes we want to add before we generate a migration, or if we should just go ahead and do the migration. I think that's probably good. So let's go ahead and run the migration here. So what are the commands for that? Migration generate, run migration generate. And if we look at that migration, I'm going to commit this migration as its own commit. Usually that's how I like to do things. Just this change here. I guess I can do it this way, stage range. So we're adding preferred units, and the migration for that is alter table, add column preferred units. Very simple. Add user.preferred units. Okie doke. And then we also need to remember to run that to actually create that column in our database. Okie doke. And then we can rerun the server. All right, so now we have our preferred units, and we can update this default units function to actually start accepting the user as a parameter and checking the user's preferred units and using that instead of just returning a hard-coded value. And I'm going to have it accept the actual user type. And see, this is interesting because, like, so say I import this from Better Auth. If I actually look at the properties on user now, it doesn't have that preferred units value that I added. And that's like the type that I want to import is not from Better Auth. I want to import it from Drizzle, from my schema. And I know there's a way to do that. I just don't know what it is. Like the type of this exercise doesn't have a name. Let's take a look at the Drizzle docs here. So my thinking is, like, I could make my own interface for this is all of the properties in a user, but I think I should be able to infer that actually from my schema using some kind of fancy type. Don't really want custom types. Where's the Drizzle TypeScript infer type. Is it this infer model thing? Search. Deprecated. Table.infer select. So it would be something like this, which is interesting. So suppose I were to put that in here. And that would be users, user, right. And now what are you complaining about? Let's do it over here, see how this works. Export type user equals that. And then if I go down here, and this is user imported from the schema, does that work? Yeah, and so now the user includes all of the fields from that schema automatically. A little bit odd. So I guess a little bit of context here. Because when you're updating a record versus when you're selecting a record, there's potentially different types. We need to use this infer select thing to basically be saying, this is the user that you would get out of a select. At least that's how I'm interpreting it. Okie doke. So now we've got our user here, and now we can use the user's preferred units to override these default values if it's set. And probably every user should have preferred units, but for now we're just going to assume that it's possibly null. And so we could say like user.preferred units weight or pound. And the same thing down here. Okie doke. So that should be good for when we're updating things. We're going to need to pass the user into each of these things now. Whoops, user. What are you complaining about? Okay, so the type of this user up here needs to be that other user that we recently created instead of the better auth user. So like this here is that user. And then when we call default unit down here, we need to pass in the user there as well. And all of this is just to get that preferred units as the unit that's actually going to be used when we're saving these parameters into the database. Having said that, ultimately, what we're going to have here is like a synchronization issue between the client and the server, where like, say the user is creating a new set. The way that it currently works, when the user creates that set, let's go back over here for a moment. What is actually sent to the server is just these, raw numbers. Like the weight is just a number. It's not 1, 2, 3 pounds. So we have to make sure that what's being rendered on the server as the unit, what's being rendered on the client as the unit for this number is the same thing as what the server is actually calculating. Normally that shouldn't be a problem. What we could do instead is use a hidden input for these so that the client is the source of truth and the server just uses whatever the client sends in. And that would reduce our code duplication a little bit, but I'm not going to worry about that quite yet. Undefined is not an object. Oh yeah, right. Okay. So yeah, so this is kind of getting to the next problem, which is when we have these calls to default unit in the UI, that also needs the user in there. And we do have the user passed into the UI as well, so we could just update this. To do that. Okay. And one thing we're not handling at all yet is unit conversion. We can get to that. But first I'm actually going to make the settings page because it'll be easier to figure that stuff out. But so now we have pounds, miles, minutes, and we should still be able to add these and have them use the proper values. Pound, mile, minutes. Yep. Okie doke. Let's make a commit with these changes. So what have we done? We've switched exercise parameters to use to parameter values to include metadata about their units. The user.preferred units setting is respected when new sets are created. Okay. So now I'm going to shift focus a little bit to doing the settings page, because that's going to allow me to actually change the preferred units for the user. And that's going to make testing a lot of these conversion type pieces of logic simpler. As a side note, this is something, again, where if I was building this app for production, or if I was collaborating with other people on it, this would be a good part of the app to actually add some unit tests for. It's not always worth it to add unit tests for UI specific elements. Like, if I want to make sure that this pug template is rendering a certain type of HTML in some cases, a certain type in another case. Personally, that feels more tedious than the benefit that it offers. Like the cost-benefit ratio is not there. But when it's talking about things like converting units or other kind of pure functions where they can easily be tested and they can also easily be got wrong and they're reused in a variety of places, that's a good place to actually add some unit tests. For this particular project, I haven't decided if in the long term I do want to add unit tests or not. Maybe that's something where I'll actually pull in a chat-oriented programming approach with LLMs to have those generate some unit tests for me and then go from there. But for now, I kind of just want to finish building out this feature, and maybe we can add unit tests later so that we can make changes confidently without feeling like we're going to break things. The other thing about unit tests that I'll mention is that they encourage a decoupling, a separation of concerns that's often valuable. So, for example, we've abstracted some logic into these model functions, and these are going to be a lot easier to unit test. Whereas in the index, we have these controller methods that have a variety of logic in them too, and it's kind of coupling the controller handling of the requests and the responses with various other things. These date conversion stuff, parsing parameters, generating objects to insert into the database, like down here, all of this stuff. if this stuff was all put into its own functions outside of controller methods, it would be a lot easier to unit test as well. So when we do get to testing, we'll probably do that if we haven't done it already and improve the separation of concerns of our application. But for a simple enough application, you don't necessarily need that much separation of concerns to begin with, just because the whole reason that you do that is to kind of tame the complexity of a large application. But if your application isn't that complex, then sometimes just having everything in one file is simpler. Like here we have, a 350 line file. It's probably getting kind of long for what I would normally want a single file to be. But if it was up to like 1,000 lines, I would start to really be concerned and be pushing myself to abstract it into subfunctions and stuff sooner. The kind of nice thing about Express, even though this is one big file, each of these controllers is kind of like its own little encapsulated unit. So it makes it easier to understand the complexity involved there, even though it is all just in one file. There's not like a lot of coupling or like huge functions or anything between the controller methods. Okay, anyway, I got off on a tangent there. What was I doing? I was going to start a new page for settings. So let's just start by copying this page here. Actually, I'm going to go down here and copy the exercises page as kind of a template. Very simple. We're going to put this down here at the bottom. And we're going to call this settings. And we're not going to need the user's exercises. Just going to call it settings. And we're going to render a settings template, or a settings view, I should say, which we'll need to create. Okay. And kind of a note here, because we put this on the authenticated router, we already know that this route is going to automatically have authorization and authentication for free, so to speak. There's no way for a user to view another user's settings. They only get their own settings based on, their session token that's handled by that better auth authentication middleware attached to the authentication router. Something I always like to think about when creating new routes is like, am I creating a route that has a security hole in it or not? So let's make a new file here, settings.pug. And again, we're just going to copy this exercises page template. Pretty much the only thing we really need here for now, though, is like settings, say. And this is just kind of like a placeholder. And then we also need to update the layout because there needs to be a way for users to actually get to this settings page, of course. So let's just go here. We can do it like this. And now, if we refresh here, there's a settings button. And if we click on that, we're taken to a settings page. And if we kind of go into mobile view here, that should also be in this dropdown automatically. Yep, settings page. Cool. So what are we actually going to put in this page? Well, one thing is we're going to want a form. Let's just copy this sort of bit of form template here. Oops. Like so. And this can post to /settings. And we're going to set preferred, or just call it weight unit. And then we're going to have another one called distance unit. And these are going to be selects. So actually, let's go just do some more copy pasting here. Let's go over here, grab one of these selects. Where do I have one of those? Here. Yeah, so that is just the name on the select and then your options. So I'm actually just going to type that out. So we've got our select, name, weight, or let's call this preferred units dot weight, and option value pound would be pounds, and kilograms would be kilograms. And then we're going to do the same thing down here. Preferred units dot distance. And with this syntax, well, we'll see, but Express has some special handling for if you have dots in your names when forms are submitted, it actually constructs that object for you with that shape. So this might make it easier when we insert the data into the database to use this, what it's called the extended syntax for form data parsing. So here we've got miles, and kilometer. And I guess we're going to also need a default value here, which would be like selected equals user dot preferred units dot distance equals mile. And this would be like, probably want to do a conditional thing there, a null coalescing property access. And then put that in parentheses maybe, yeah. And the same thing up here. Let's just put these in, and then this would be weight, and this would be pound, and this would be kilogram. Oops, kilogram. And this would be selected. Yep, and selected. And I think, like, if I double check one of these other pages, yeah, so I'm using the same pattern here. Okay, so let's call this update. And these can all be indented one, outdented, whatever you call it. Hi, it's going good. What framework is that? I'm using Express for the server framework. It's really more a lightweight HTTP routing layer. And then for views here, we're using Pug. So with Express, you have the ability to, like, for a given route, you can render a view, and then you can use a variety of different, like, templating languages for that. So in this case, it's Express plus Pug. And for authentication, I'm using BetterAuth library. So not really one main framework, but Express, I guess, would be the short answer. Okie doke. Oh. Not happy with the question mark dots, it looks like. So let's just get rid of that. And see if that fixes it. Right, so it wasn't happy with the question mark dots, but now it's saying, like, oh, this object doesn't exist, which is exactly what the question mark is supposed to help with. But I guess that syntax isn't possible in Pug. So, you know, I'll have to do something like this, like put in a conditional here. Kind of awkward, but used to be you had to have these all over the place before they added those null coalescing operators in the first place. Never heard about Pug. Yeah, Pug is a, I mean, you know, Some people like it, some people don't, but it's basically a shorthand syntax for writing HTML templates, similar to like maybe you heard of HAML, HAML. Pug is kind of like that. It uses indentation instead of requiring you to close your elements, and then it also lets you kind of embed JavaScript right in there to generate values instead of, having to do your HTML templating in a more annoying way. Certainly it's possible with plain HTML, or like something like EJS, which is non-HTML specific, is another JavaScript templating library that kind of requires more typing. Pug is like, can only be used for generating like HTML or like XML type things. Unlike EJS, which can be used for any format, but on the flip side, it makes a lot of things quicker to type. Like as an example, if you're adding a class to an element, you can just do like a dot field using like a similar CSS type of syntax instead of having to write like class equals field. And there's a lot of shorthands like that in Pug. And I'm not a Pug expert either. This is actually my first project using it in anger, so to speak. So I'm sure there's a lot of things that I'm missing about it as well. The only template you've used is Twig. Not familiar with Twig, but yeah, that's Symfony. That's a PHP framework, right? I've never actually used PHP, but I've heard good things about Symfony. One of the nice things about Pug that I'll call out, it has like inheritance and extension kind of things. So like we have this shared layout template or whatever. I'm not sure what exactly the term is, but and then we can, for each of these pages, it can just extend that layout and define the content for the various blocks. Like there's this content block and we can populate what goes in there. So reusable. Pug also has an interesting thing called mix-ins, which I haven't used yet, where you can basically define little functions. Sort of like components, if you're familiar with like React components, but purely on the HTML side. But you can define like reusable bits and even accept parameters for them. So, once I actually want to dry this up, like reduce all the duplication, I'll probably be using mix-ins to do that, but I haven't gotten there yet. Interesting. Yeah. I didn't realize there was a country-specific preference for different frameworks, but I guess that makes a lot of sense. Okie doke. So now we have our, well, I don't really know where that input came from. Let's fix that. Oh yeah, don't need that. So now we have our weight unit and distance unit. And let's try to change these. So kilometers, kilograms, update. So this is not going to work, but we can see what it's doing. It's doing a post request to settings with the name of the form data being preferred units.weight and preferred units.distance. And then the value is the, the value of those selects. The problem is we haven't actually defined a post/settings route that's going to be able to handle that update operation. So let's do that now. Post/settings and get the user. And then we can just, let's see what exactly we have here. So if we log rec.params, and then once we actually update the user, we're going to redirect them back to the settings page. Yeah, so, okay, not going to be able to refresh here. Just have to, because when I hit refresh, it's trying to do the post again. But if I go back to this page, update these, click update, now, it did the post and it redirected me back because I haven't actually put in the code to do the update. Nothing changed in the UI, but we should be able to see, sorry, not rec.params, this would be rec.body. we want to see what it is looking like on the server. Okay, so this is not actually what I expected. So we have preferred units.weight and preferred units.distance. I was kind of thinking there was going to be a preferred units object with weight and distance as properties on that object. Because we're using this URL encoded extended true property. So I'm kind of curious why that's not happening. Let's actually look at the Express docs here. And I think, yeah, okay, let's see what we have to see here. Something in this QS library. Okay, so it would be brackets instead of a dot, I guess, is what we need to do. So instead of dot weight, we would do like brackets weight, which makes sense, I guess, kind of. So now if we do kilograms and kilometers and we do an update, what is the server logging? Yeah, so now we actually have this object structured according to kind of what we expect. Couldn't you just destructure your body object to give it the shape you want? Yes, I could. Really, the only reason that I'm using this extended syntax is because it just makes it a little bit more obvious how the names on the front end correspond to what we're ultimately going to be saving in the database on the back end. So like, for instance, I could just call these like preferred units underscore weight, or even just weight and distance. And then on the back end, I could put those into the preferred units object, and that would work perfectly fine. But then if I wanted to add another preferred unit, I would also need to update not just the front end, but the back end code as well to, destructure that new property basically. Whereas with this approach, it's like, I'm probably still going to need to do that anyway, because I don't want to just accept any field from the front end. So I guess it mostly just comes down to preference. Okie doke. So now we're going to be updating the user. And again, I'm just going to sort of copy some of this code so I don't have to remember the syntax for Drizzle. We're going to be updating the user table. Yeah, this is kind of annoying. So let's look at our schema here. We have this table called user, but in this method, we also have an actual variable called user. And I kind of want to keep using user for that. So I'm actually going to do a renaming import here, like user as user table. And then down here, this is going to be update user table. And we're going to set the preferred units. And so here's where, like, for instance, I could actually just set this to like rec.body.preferred units now. But one of the things about that is you're giving the client control of what values in this you want to set. Maybe some of these preferred units I don't want to allow the user to set for some reason. Doesn't really matter. But ultimately, I actually am going to do like this. Like weight is rec.body.preferred units .weight. And actually, I'm going to get rid of these because I wanted to throw an error if those don't exist. And then we also have, what's the other one? Distance. And we're complaining about It's missing number, intensity, and duration. Okay, so this is just another type issue here. Because the type of this preferred units is all data types, but not all of these data types actually need a unit. Yeah, for updating a put or patch, that's true. But one of the things that we're doing here is actually using this form to handle sending the request for us. So we're not using JavaScript to send a request to the backend. The browser is doing it automatically. And the browser form method only supports get and post. So even if we wanted to do a put or a patch, that's not actually possible, as far as I know, unless we start to pull in some kind of JavaScript library to do that, which we do have JavaScript. And I'm actually using this JavaScript library called DataStar, which kind of handles, well, let me show you a quick example. It handles basically data binding and things like that. So you can have like on-change handlers that do things, and you can define signals and then use those signals. So like, for instance, over here, if I go to the today page, if I do like this log an exercise, it doesn't show any fields. And then when I select an exercise, it still doesn't show any fields. But when I select an exercise with parameters, it pops up with those parameters for that exercise. And that's, JavaScript functionality doing that dynamic change. So, I could use the DataStar library to say like, when this submit button is clicked, send this request with fetch or something like that. And then we would have a lot more flexibility on how we design our API. But as long as we're actually using the form functionality that doesn't require JavaScript, we're limited to get and post, I think. Yes. So here, kind of the problem is that not all these data types actually need a unit. So just for simplicity, I think I can do a partial here. And then, does that work? No. So really, I'm actually just going to have this be weight or duration, because those are the only two that actually need a unit for now. And now the error's gone away. Distance, oh, sorry, weight and distance, not weight and duration. Getting those mixed up like crazy. Everything looks cool. Thanks. If you do have specific questions about things, happy to dig into that. Part of the reason that I'm doing this stream in the first place is to kind of share and explain my process. So happy to talk. But yeah, in terms of explaining everything, it's just a bit too broad. But yeah, kind of the idea here is like I'm building an app where, like, normally for me in the past, I've done React-based applications where it heavily relies on JavaScript functionality to render the entire user interface. This one is more of a traditional, almost like a Rails style application where, the HTML is rendered on the server side and JavaScript is only used where interactivity is strictly necessary. And I don't think there's like a real practical benefit to that, because people still need JavaScript in order for the app to actually work in some ways. So it's not like you could use it without JavaScript, but it's just kind of a new way of building an app to me, or really more of like going back to an old way. And with this like server-side rendering. Okay, so we're updating. And so here, like, we just copy pasted this where clause, so we don't need that part in it anymore. And this is the user table dot ID is user.id. And we don't need the and either. So what this is saying is update the user table to set preferred units for, or, where the ID is equal to our user.id. So we're updating our own user. And we have our updated user here. For now, we don't actually need this, so let's get rid of that. And let's take a look at the settings page again. So now we should actually be able to change these and see it persist. So if I update this to kilograms and click it, so this is not updating to kilograms. Let's actually pull this updated user back in and see what's in it. See if the update happened as we expect or if something else is going on. Kilograms, update. So here the updated user, oh, well, it's just this thing. I would have to add a returning. But one thing I can actually do instead, kind of an illustration of a slightly different approach, is if I open Table Plus here, I'll get to my Express course very soon. That's cool. Are you in school? So if I go user here, here's the preferred units for my user. So it does have the kilograms. And like if I switch this back to, say if I switch this to kilometers and I click update, my user record should be now distance kilometers. Yeah. So the problem then seems to be that even though the actual user is updated, well, actually, I'm wondering here. So there's potentially a couple problems. One is we want to make sure that the user in our actual session is updated. So let's go back here. Learning on your own. That's cool. Yeah, there's a lot to learn. Oh, okay. So wait a minute. This is a different user. So what is going on here? So I've got, or no, it's not a different user, but it's not the actual database user. So let me explain what I think the problem is here. We've got our user that we're loading from the request. This is the user that the session is authenticated with. And that's being constructed using this get session middleware function, if I recall. And if we look at that, that's using this better auth API get session function. So kind of what we're seeing here is that this user being loaded from the session is not actually the same as the user being loaded from the database for some reason. And I don't know, there's kind of a few things we could do here. The best would be if this get session function could actually read that user from the database. And maybe it does, but it might only be selecting certain fields. But kind of the other thing that we might do instead is if we say like request.user is await and actually read that from the database, which, again, I don't really remember the drizzle syntax. Let's see here. Drizzle, by the way, is like the ORM that I'm using for this. So, you know, a lot of times it's like your framework has a module for the ORM and a module for the, you know, the routing functionality and a module for the views and so on. In my case, I'm actually using different libraries for all of these different bits. And drizzle is the ORM in question. One of the kind of complicated things with JavaScript is the fact that there's also TypeScript. So like in this code, I have types defined, which then need to be evaluated by TypeScript and compiled down into JavaScript in order for this code to actually run. And Drizzle has good integration with TypeScript, which is one of the reasons that I'm using it as an ORM. It's kind of a TypeScript native ORM. But anyway, so I'm going to do like db.select .from user table, and I'm going to have to do that special import again here. Or no, actually this is doing star as schema, so I could do like schema.user. Seems like not a bad approach. And then find or where, I guess it would be, right? Where the schema.user.id is equal to the session data.user.id. And this equals, for some reason, the auto import sometimes doesn't find these, but this gets imported from the Drizzle core. So like import equals from Drizzle ORM, if I recall. Let's compare that here. Yeah. Okie doke. And then this part we can get rid of. And this would be like 0. And then this all goes into parentheses. Yes. Okie doke. All right, see you next time. Okay, so here we have the user in our, our middleware is actually being pulled from the database. So now down here, let's go back to the testing page. If we do this, it's actually updated to the correct values. If I update this, then it stays updated if I refresh the page. Okay, so now we've got that functionality there. And this is good too, because like this default unit thing in all these other controllers where we were passing in the user, these also were not working before. So we've kind of fixed that bug that we didn't even know we had. Okay, so let's, we've switched these to kilograms and kilometers. Let's go back to today, maybe in a new tab, and see what happens when we try to add a new exercise. So now we see kilograms, kilograms, kilometers. If we do these, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, add, it actually was added with the correct units. One of the things we'll note though is like for these old ones, it still is using the old units. And like if I click edit on one, it's still actually using the old units. And if I like set this to 1, 2, 3, 4 though, and submit that, you can see that like it updated that unit despite the UI showing pound. So the UI was based on the, like if we look here, the UI was based on the unit of the existing value in the set. And then the actual update was using the value in the default units, right? Like if we go over to post sets ID, it's using this default unit value instead of the unit in the UI. So we have a mismatch here. And we could, we kind of need to think about how we want to handle this, right? We could have it where you're editing the existing set in pounds and it just stays in pounds, even though I've switched my preferred unit. But really what we want, what the user probably wants, is for these values to actually be shown in kilograms. And then when they make a change, that change is persisted in kilograms. And so in order to do that, we're actually going to need to start adding some of that unit conversion logic. So let's start kind of thinking about that a little bit. First, let's see if I'm going to make a commit for this settings page. So we're adding settings. We're updating the schema to fix a bug there. We're adding the post and get settings. I can get rid of this console log, and I can get rid of this console log. And the auth one, we're also, I'll just put that in the same commit. Okie doke. So this is add settings page, allow user to configure preferred units. Okay. Okay, so now we need to actually do the unit conversion that I just talked about. So where are we going to do that? Let's start by looking at the view, I guess. I've got a lot of logic in this view, which I'm not super happy about, but we can worry about that later. And we still haven't thought about the duration at all. That's kind of a special case. But I think it's fine to just leave that at minutes for now. At least it's really clear. Even if it's not very configurable. Ultimately, like if you think about as a user filling out duration, you kind of want to be able to do like 01:00 being like 1 minute, and then like 01:00:00 being like 1 hour or something like that. But we're not going to be parsing that out quite yet. Just going to leave it as a simple number. And we're going to be dealing with these other units first. Let me add that as a note though. That could be a good next action. Support durations other than minutes, seconds, hours, etc. Okie doke. So back to what we were doing. So if we look at the parameter.data type here, we have our parameter.unit. And then we also have, so here's where kind of going back to the very beginning of this stream, I was talking about how there's two different units at play. There's the unit that the user wants to be displayed in, or wants, the value to be displayed in. And there's also the unit that the value is actually stored in. And here we have like, this is the value that the unit is stored in. And then the value that the unit wants it to be displayed in is that default unit function, whatever that returns. So what we're actually going to do here is like have this be well, let's start by making a function here. Export function convert unit or something like that. And it's going to be like from or like value number from string. Let's just make it simple for now to string. and it's returning a number. And so this would be something like if from equals to return value. There's no conversion that needs to happen here. If from equals mile and 2 equals kilogram or kilometer, then we're going to want to do something, right? Return something. And for now, I'm just going to put value in here again. And if it's kilometer and mile, then we're going to do like the inverse of that thing. And then we also have pound and kilogram and pound. And, you know, we could define something like unit ratios, maybe. But for now, I think I'm actually just going to hard code it in the code. So let's ask Google what the actual ratios are. So like if I do 1 pound in kilograms, this says it's 0.45, blah, blah, blah. And it's funny because you'll notice like as soon as I try to change the kilogram value, it converts it back into pounds, but we can see that it's not totally accurate. These conversions are always going to have this like kind of decimal place issue. So when we display these to the users, we're going to need to round them. And also when we're calculating the difference, you know, we want to be moderately accurate, but it's not going to be perfectly accurate. So like from pound to kilogram, it would be like value times this. And from kilogram to pound, like if I do that, it would be value times this. And then like if I do 1 mile in kilometers, that would be value times this. Oops, value times this. And if I switch it around, it's going to be value times this. And, you know, here's where like this convert unit function could handle the rounding itself, but I think it's better to have that handled in the UI because this function doesn't necessarily care how many decimal places we need. The UI is the thing that's actually going to be concerned with the number of decimal places based on what the user experience, you know, we want it to be. Quick time check here. Okie doke. Definitely not going to get to the UI improvements, seems like. Spending most of our time on this settings and units, which is totally fine because this is important and kind of complicated. And if this doesn't hit any of these cases, we're going to throw an error, cannot convert units. And maybe I will make this a template string, cannot convert from to. So like if somebody tries to convert mile to kilogram, it's just going to blow up. Or if either of these are undefined or something like that, perchance, you know, the TypeScript type says that these should be a string, but at the runtime, there's no guarantee that these values are going to be strings. And that should also just blow up. Okay, so now we have our conversion function. So now let's look at let's pass that function into the today page for starters. Convert unit. Okie doke. And so now, you know, this value here is actually going to be the default unit of set.parameters, or no, of parameter.datatype. and user. And then the value is actually going to be the convert unit of this value. And the from is going to be .unit. And the to is going to be the default unit. And, you know, again, this is starting to feel kind of repetitious. One of the things I think you can do is, like, if I were to do, well, let's look at the docs here for a moment. Yeah, you could do like an unbuffered code block. So I could say like const unit equals that. Or even like I could do this, and then I could say like const value equals that. And then this would be like, or let's call this parameter value, param value. So then this would be like param value.value, param value.unit, and unit. And then this down here would be a unit. Just a bit less repetitious, maybe. And I think that should work. And really this param value thing, I could put this up here. And then we could reuse that param value like here and here as well. And I think this will work. Let's look at the today page. It's not happy with something. Does it not work that way? I thought you could define variables in these. Yeah, so like here it's defining a list. Oh, maybe I can't use const. Kind of hate that, but whatever. It's one of the things I'm not as much of a fan of with Pug is it's like the actual syntax is like JavaScript-like, but it's not literally JavaScript, it seems like. Same thing with like not being able to use the question mark dot. It's kind of annoying. You have to keep track of like what subset is available in Pug. And I was complaining about this convert unit. Okay. Yeah, so now, like, let's get rid of this editing. So let's look at this first one here. So we have pounds is the value that's stored in the database, and we'll have to update this viewing code as well to do the conversion. But for now, we're just working on the editing part. So we can see that this has got the database values in pounds. If I just click edit, those are automatically going to be converted to kilograms and kilometers. And then if I click submit, making no changes, the values in the database will also actually be updated to use the kilograms and kilometers values. Okay, seems like that's working pretty well. And if, you know, I change one of these to 600, submit. What? That's a weird one. What? So the input is So I guess what we can see here is like, it doesn't accept decimals at all, it seems like. And because the initial value previously has always been a whole number, we haven't run into that problem. But now we're kind of running into this problem where the value not being a whole number, the step, I believe it is. So like, let's look at input type number and see what it says here for the step. An appropriate default value which are equal to the basis for stepping. The default stepping number for is 1. Okay, unless the stepping base is not an integer. So that's kind of what we're running into here. The stepping base is not an integer. And so we're getting this mess. So one of the things we can do here is we can actually set the min to 0. And that should fix the stepping base. But it also means that the value that's actually stored in there, like if I try to submit this like as it is, I think I get an error. Yeah. So a couple things. I think we want the step to actually be, say, 0.01 instead. And then or 0.1 maybe. I mean, kind of the problem with this is like, so we set our stepping base to 0.1. Now when somebody clicks this, it's only incrementing it by 0.1 at a time, which, as a user, that's pretty annoying. I mean, I don't know how frequently users use these plus or minus buttons, but if they do want to use that, you would kind of expect that to go up and down by a whole value of 1 at a time. But you don't necessarily want to actually limit the value to a whole value of 1 if the user is typing it in themselves. For now, this is fine. So let's say a step of 0.1. And then in order for the value to not start out with all these things, we're going to need to do a round in here. And I mean, what does that do? Does that work at all? Math.round. It does work. It rounds it to the nearest whole integer. I believe there's a way to round it to a like 0.1 of an integer. So one way that you can always do that is by basically multiplying the value by 10 and then rounding it and then dividing it. But that's kind of annoying. Isn't there? I feel like there's some kind of like significant figure thing. To fixed. Right. I think that's what I'm thinking of here. So it would be like convert unit dot to fixed 1. Let's see. Convert unit dot to fixed is not a function. So let's look. To fixed would be a property on the number object. And so why is that not working, I wonder? Maybe does this need to be in parentheses? Weird pugism? No. I mean, it says it's undefined. Let's actually put this into the convert unit function just because that will maybe make it a little more obvious what's going on. Like if we did this, to fixed 1, what's this complaining about now? It's returning a string. Right. Let's add a well, let's just do it like this. And then we would have like let new value. And then this would be like new value equals, instead of returning. And then we're going to well, I don't know. I kind of like doing it the other way better, actually. Put these all in parentheses. And then do dot to fixed 1. And we're just going to see how this works out. And this is now returning a string. And this would be like value dot to string. And actually, let's put the precision in here as well. And that will default to 1. And then these will all be precision. And then this will also be to fixed precision. Okie doke. What does that look like now? So now we're getting an error. Convert unit line 15. Okay, so why is that not working? It is a number, right? Do I have to do like a weird thing? Like I have to box it? Like number? Like that? Well, new number? This is annoying. Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't look like I need to box it at all. What am I missing? I feel like I must be missing something stupid here. What if I just did like toString here? Does that work? Just out of curiosity. toString, 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 toString. That also doesn't work. toString. Okay. And then what if I do these as toFixed, and that one as toString? toString. I'm wondering if the value is maybe okay, so the problem is with this case here, I could do like toFixed precision, and then that's going to start to produce an error, right? Right. So what if I do JSON.stringify value? See what our actual value is here. Are these strings? Is that the problem? Yeah, so the problem is that these are strings. So this would be like parse, or like just do like number value dot toFixed precision, and then that should maybe fix it. Okay, that seems to have maybe fixed it. And then like if I just submit this, it works. And if I change one to 100 and submit that, it works. Okay, so now we've got that kind of working. And that convert unit function is now kind of doing two things. It's converting the unit and it's also rounding the unit. Not a huge fan of that, coupling them together, but for now, I'm not super concerned about that either. So I'm just going to leave it as is until we end up with some other use cases where that starts to become a problem. And then we're going to need to kind of replicate this same thing down here. So like, we don't need the value when we're creating a new exercise because there is no existing value, but we do still want the min in the step for consistency's sake. And then the span being the default unit, that's correct. And yes. Okay. So now like if I do add an exercise, wait, it's going to give me like 0.1 increments. Or I could do like 100. But if I do something like 100.123, I get an error. If I do 100.1, that works. And then if I switch these, if I switch my settings back to, say, pounds, update that, and then refresh the page over here, these all say kilograms still, but then if I edit one, I get my converted values here. So like that pounds value, you know, previously it was this like 559.3, which it had gotten from converting the pounds back to kilograms. And then when I'm doing this, it's converting it back to pounds, and we're getting a nice round number. And the reason the number is round is because we're rounding it to just one significant digit. If we included enough significant digits, this would not equal a whole number anymore. But the difference is small enough that it's getting rounded down to that whole number. Okie doke. So let's see. One other thing I'm going to do here is update the view side to also use the correct unit. So we've got like our default unit. And, you know, for a lot of these units, like maybe there's something where we want to have like a display label for it as well as a key. You know, like for pounds, it's like the unit name is just pound. The display label is probably going to be like LBS dot, right? And those two are kind of different. But for now, we're just going to use the key for both cases. And this would be like a convert unit type of thing. Of set.parameters, parameter.id .value. And so here I'm actually going to do like a thing like we have above, where it's like var param value equals this. And then if param value, param value.value, param value.unit. And this piece of logic is only actually going to work if the data type is one of these. So we're kind of going to need to copy these again, where it's like if parameter dot data type, let's see, just paste this in. Then do this. Else if parameter dot data type is duration, then we're going to do param value dot minutes plus minutes. I'll put a space in here as well. And otherwise, the param value or parameter name is just the param value. Yes. So now, like if I get rid of this editing, sign me out again for some reason. Sign back in. What's going on with that? Feels like that's something to do with the change that I made to the middleware for some reason. Oh, okay. So let's take a look at the middleware for a moment. Okay, so it is async. Session data.user.id. I mean, that seems right. Okay, I guess, I don't know. It was right. It just took it a minute to figure that out. Not really sure what was up with that. but now what error do we have here? Cannot convert kilogram to undefined. So it's doing this convert unit. Oh, right. And it's converting the unit to this unit, which I didn't define anywhere. So this would be like the default unit. So like I could do var unit equals that. And then this is also unit. Okay, so now it's showing it in the units that I'm asking for as well. So if I change this to kilograms, then refresh this, these are now the values in kilograms. And if I edit them, we see the values in kilograms here. If I add an exercise, we see the values in kilograms here. Seems to be working pretty well. Hi, what am I making? I'm building an exercise tracking application. So basically the idea here is users can create their own exercises and define what parameters that exercise has, like basically what they need to fill out for each set for that exercise. And then they can, for each day, they can create sets for that exercise, fill out the parameters, track their exercises over time, and so on. That's kind of the idea. I'm actually getting close to wrapping up now, though, so if you just joined, sorry, but you'll probably have to catch it next week to really see very much. But before I do wrap up, there's one other thing to mention. So if we actually look at these numbers here, or these charts here, I mean, are probably not going to actually work for the updated data types because they're referencing the wrong properties. Because we changed the format of the parameter values to be this object instead of just being like a number. The chart rendering code doesn't know that up here. And so that's going to need to be updated to populate the data set in different ways based on the different parameters. And I'm just going to do that now real fast. Hopefully it doesn't take too long because I am running over time already. So this would be like const param value equals that. And then we could say like, why is that not, doesn't like my const? I don't know, looks valid to me. Okay, now it likes it. So we're going to need to say something where it's like, I mean, we could just do something simple here for now, where it's like if param value dot value, or like, let's do it this way, return param value dot value, or param value dot minutes, or param value plain. And so with that, if I refresh this page here, we're actually getting values for, you know, those things we were just filling out, showing up in the chart. Okie doke. Let us commit these changes. Support displaying and editing sets using the user's preferred units. And we've got this. We've got this just creating the convert unit function, passing it in, actually defining the convert unit function, and then updating the today to do that. All right, let's commit that. push these changes. And I think that's about it. Thanks, y'all. See you next week.